Okay. All right. Thank you all for staying. Thank you to our great panel. So this is a workshop that we host every year at this conference, just to give you all a sense, those of you working in your communities, in your work, in your lives, about what is happening or may very well be considered in the upcoming legislative session, which begins in January. I think, as we heard several times, different speakers, and as you know well, as a state and certainly as communities, our ability to make progress towards the 90 by 2050 goal and really act on climate is premised in large part by supportive policies. And we have really done well in the electric sector. And just to put a finer point on what our friends from EAN said is, I just want to say that our success in the electric sector was not by accident. It was by good, strong, supportive state policies put in place by very forward-looking legislators who felt the support of their constituents in doing that kind of work. So it required good, strong policies. That requires political will. And from where I sit, that's where we all come in helping to ensure that we create a fertile foundation for our allies in the legislature to be bold, be bolder than ever because of how far we are falling. So I want to introduce our panel, and I'm going to say a few words just about who we have on our panel, the order, and then let you know that in the end we're going to have time for question and answers. But this morning we are really lucky to have Senator Chris Bray from Addison County, who has long chaired the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee, to be determined, but I hope that you will be back in that role again. No need to spill the beans? Okay. We are also lucky to have Senator Becca Ballant from Windham County, who is also the Senate's Majority Leader. Senator Ballant is a true leader on many issues. It's great to have you here. And then Lauren Hurl, who's the Executive Director of the Vermont Conservation Voters. So Senator Bray, who's really led and championed some of Vermont's most important environmental and clean energy issues, is going to start us off with a sort of sharing his thoughts and a look forward on what we might expect in the 2019 session. Then we'll hear from Senator Ballant about a little more detail on that, but more so how can we help. And then Lauren will walk us through what our role is as concerned citizens, organizations, businesses, advocates, in helping to create, again, that more fertile ground. So without further ado, Senator Bray, I can bring you the mic or have you come up here, your choice.
I'd like to stay at the table.
Great. Okay.
Good morning. So it's great to be back at VECAN. It's always, you're not supposed to say this kind of thing, but it's just true. For me, it's my favorite conference of the year because it's full of engaged, active citizens from all over the state who have dug into energy issues and made them their own and expressed them at the local level, which I think is all, in general, always our strongest work. I've been thinking back to the presentations we've already had this morning, and Bill McKibben asked a question. I wrote it down as, in the poetic version is, what is wise? And the prose version is, what steps are we taking now and in the coming year? We have work to do, and the encouraging thing, well, we all know the encouraging things that have happened already, and we all know the daunting things about the limits to our success so far. I won't dwell, already enough has been said about the negative things going on in DC in terms of taking support away from us. So it means to me that on the state level and on the local level, we need to look for more opportunities to build stronger programs. I'd like to do two things. One is just remind us of some programs in play and talk a little bit about where they are. None is perfect, but all of them are making contributions, and I think we have the opportunity to tune things in the coming year on our existing programs. Sometimes I think legislators can get into the bright shiny object syndrome, which is, to me, presenting, always developing new bills and forgetting to slow down and look at the work of the existing law and make sure that it's being executed well and implemented well. There's often our biggest gains come from executing better on goals, targets, and programs we've already laid out for ourselves, rather than coming up with yet another program on top. I'll contradict myself in 2 minutes when I offer something new. So net metering, I mean, the net metering program has been very successful in terms of building out over 10,000 projects in the state of Vermont, but we also we have a wrestling match going on between how much are we willing to pay for that and how much more are we going to build. And so that leads into, so let me just put a placeholder on coming back to how would we do more net metering-like projects. Act 56 in our renewable energy standard, Tier 3, we're still just at the beginning of Act 56 and Tier 3 work. It's I call it, the innovative maker space of energy projects. It'll be interesting to see what we do in the coming year in terms of addressing greenhouse gas emissions and getting electric utilities outside their normal bailiwick of just dealing with electrical generation. Act 174, I know a lot of people are on their town energy committees, and Act 174, the energy siting work that we passed 2 years ago, town by town, region by region, we're passing and developing energy plans. So I hope many of you are engaged in that local town energy plan, so that your town has not only a robust plan, but it also puts you on the pathway to having the greater influence of the Public Utility Commission through substantial deference to your plan. H410 and 411, so 2 energy efficiency bills that we did in the last biennium that cumulatively are anticipated to save Vermonters $210 million just through having more efficient appliances by the year 2035. And that's $550 a year off energy bills. So I paused to get into those details for a moment because when we talk about affordability in the state, there's, I think one of the things there's a big opportunity going forward this biennium, I think, in terms of having a conversation. What do we really mean by affordability? Is it simply lower taxes, or is it making life more affordable for people through things that would include making more efficient appliances the norm for everyone, saving them that $555 a year? 410 also had a sleeper provision, and that is that we're going to get our first, I'm calling it the low-hanging fruit report back from the Department of Public Service this year. It's a dashboard/report, and it says, in order to stay on the trajectory outlined in our CEP, what are the most cost-effective things to be looking at in 1, 3, and 5 years in generation, transportation, and thermal? We did some work on electric vehicles last year, and we can do a lot more. Some of that's been spun off to a new docket at the PUC, which is going to be good for the amount of information that will come out of that docket. It's a little frustrating because I think some of the things that were offered up as questions to be investigated, I wish we had just made decisions and we were already moving forward. So net metering, I was talking about cost effectiveness in terms of community level energy, and I will reintroduce a modified version of a community energy bill, which is renewable energy projects akin to net metering, but built off a wholesale price with a stack of adders on top to keep the price down, but also to allow us to build at a larger scale, like up to 5 megawatts. In terms of support for EVs, I think we have that Volkswagen settlement money, the $3.5 million. Last year when I put in let's waive the purchasing use tax on the first $30,000 on electric vehicle purchase, The challenge, of course, was, well, how are you going to pay for that tax expenditure? Now we actually have funding coming into the state that could be, I think, appropriately used in just that kind of a thing. Full cost, the beige bill, I'll reintroduce, it's full cost accounting for fuels. One of the challenges we have whenever we want to talk about pricing carbon is that we don't have solid accounting that says what are the full costs and benefits of any fuel choice. So a neutral question, and it just says, look at the full cost and benefits of any fuel choice in front of you and include its externalities. We have not been developing a robust analysis of negative externalities, and I think it leads to short-sighted costs. So we've talked about things like, would you have a moratorium on pipelines? My hope would be actually that we would have a robust analysis that would tell us that a pipeline is not a wise investment. So it wouldn't be a philosophical statement, it would be a financial analysis that would propel the step forward. And I'll stop there. So that's just, I wanted to tee up a few things that are, you can see in the in basket and remind us of what's already going on and pass the mic along.
Good morning. It's a treat to be here. I'm Senator Rebecca Ballin. I represent Windham County, and as Joey mentioned earlier, I'm the majority leader in the Senate. I live in Brattleboro with my two very incorrigible children and my incorrigible Labradoodle. And I bring them into this conversation because a lot of what I think about and a lot of what I do in the legislature is shaped by my conversations with them and also with my dog. My role really on this panel is to offer a more sweeping view of the lay of the land. Is this mic working all right? I feel like it's fading in and out. Okay, great. A more sweeping view of the lay of the land as I see it, while my senator colleague Chris Bray will give you much more of the details because he is the chair of that committee and we do the work together. I want you to understand the context in which we do our work as a caucus in the Senate and what are the pieces that come into play. So I want to start by acknowledging something that I think most of you are also probably feeling, which is I'm not sleeping well these days. There's a lot that's keeping me up at night. I'm worried about what's happening at the federal level or not happening at the federal level. I'm worried about action in Vermont and inaction in Vermont. I'm concerned about the members of my community who call me and say, I'm working multiple jobs and I can't make ends meet, or I lost a member of my family to the opioid epidemic. There is a lot that worries me. And as the child of an immigrant and as the grandchild of someone who was killed in the Holocaust, I also always have an eye to geopolitics. And I am at once grounded in my house in Vermont on South Main Street in Brattleboro with my pack of incorrigibles. And I'm also thinking about what is happening in my grandfather's homeland, which was Hungary. And I've watched in dismay the rise of fascist rhetoric throughout Europe. And the two most dominant right-wing parties right now in Europe are in Hungary and in Poland. Their illiberal policies, including the crackdown on independent judiciaries, have made them the only two countries ever to be censured by the European Parliament for undermining democratic values. The recent surge of right-wing populism should worry us all for many reasons. But in the context of this discussion today about climate action, we know that loud voices on the right-wing populism, it drowns out substantive conversations on climate action. We know this. We see it at home. We see this tendency in our own president. His nationalistic rhetoric not only gives cover and refuge to climate change deniers, in a much more broad sense, it gives permission writ large for all of us to be more selfish and myopic in how we approach the world. The message is often loud and clear. It is good and right for us to think about ourselves and ourselves only. And a lot of Americans hear this message and it resonates with them. And quite a few Vermonters do as well. I've got mine. It's your responsibility to get yours. This, of course, makes it very difficult for us to build coalitions across the state, across our communities, across the globe, and the nation on this work, on climate action. When the message shifts from a more hopeful, for the good of us all, to a much more fear-based, me first, well, as you know, collective action becomes much more difficult. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge the tactical, insidious underlying message, which is, it is unpatriotic to be a global citizen. You who decry climate change, you are not true patriots. That is what we are being told every day. So we have to consciously and bravely pivot to what I believe is a much more hopeful frame of the world, which is the Paul Wellstone view, which is we all do better when we all do better. And we have to help our fellow citizens see that as well. And that's where you play such a vital part in this. Wellstone also said, politics is about the improvement of people's lives. It's about lessening human suffering, which is why I talk about my children and my dog at the beginning, which is I think about them all the time. How do I lessen their suffering long term on this planet? So I spend a lot of time as majority leader thinking about what are those obstacles that get in the way of meeting our overarching goals. How do we actively, effectively do the work of improving people's lives and alleviating suffering? And I've been thinking a lot lately about the artificial barriers that we construct that inadvertently limit our ability to do our best work. So one of them, which is my new kick that I'm on right now, one of them is the artificial barrier, the tribalism that exists in the House of Representatives and the Senate here in Vermont. There's so much rivalry between these two houses. And I'm so done with it. I am so done with it. I find it completely counterproductive. And I'm only 4 years into my job in the Senate. And I can't for the life of me figure out how this serves any of us. So I'm going to continue on this fight. It feels so painfully obvious to me. How can we get work done when we're not able to pass legislation just with one chamber? We need each other. And we do our best work when there's more communication, not less communication. We as senators and as House members have very different lenses on the state and on the work that we do. And that's good. When you represent a town, you're going to have a different view of how policy is going to impact than when you represent an entire county. Both those perspectives are valuable. So I've worked really hard with my counterpart in the House, Jill Kowinski. She's the majority leader in the House. We have spent hours and hours of cross-chamber conversation. And we all need to be doing this across towns, across communities, across our segments, our tribalistic segments in our own town. We have to see each other as conduits for ideas and not for owning ideas. Because when we get ego out of the way, we can get so much more done. So I have a lot more to say, but I'm going to hold off. And I want to just say that we, I know, on this panel, feel really strongly that one of our main goals today is to hear from all of you. The best ideas come from you on the ground, in your towns, to help us shape our work. And I want to say my charge to you going forward is to figure out who is not being heard in your town, in your community, and amplify those voices. I gave one of the welcoming speeches last year, and I talked about a concept that I believe in so strongly, which is the concept of radical leadership, meaning our role as leaders is to figure out whose voice is not there and how do we turn up the volume. But we are just several people, we're in a chamber of 30. You have that same ability out in the field. So I hope that you will help us in this work. I'm looking forward to a robust conversation at the end, and I'm so glad we're all here doing this work together.
Thank you, Senators. Hi, everyone. So great to see you all. See lots of familiar faces and new faces, both of which are exciting. My name is Lauren Hurl. I'm the Executive Director of Vermont Conservation Voters. And at VCV, we work to help elect pro-environment lawmakers. We work to advocate for strong environmental laws and work to hold lawmakers accountable. And in your packet, you should see a vision for climate action. So we heard some specific ideas and some context of what's been happening in recent years from Senator Bray. And a group of us had kind of come together this summer, and as we're watching the IPCC report and all of the just renewed urgency that all of us have felt for years who are in this room, but has not been felt, unfortunately, as broadly as we need. And we wanted to put out some kind of a slate of ideas that are a suite of state investments and state policies to help spur the transformation, particularly, as we all heard this morning during the EAN presentation, of our transportation and heating sectors, where we know we have the most work to do. And so the ideas that we put out together were really some very specific things that we really want to get done in 2019. And we're open to if there are other ideas, but our message is we need to get serious. We need to take real action. We have not made the progress on the suite of climate solutions that we need in the last biennium. There was very little to show for climate action, and particularly at this moment of federal abdication of responsibility, that's not acceptable. And so we wanted to put out some specific ideas that we thought that we could really pass this year, but just know that we know that this is far short of what is needed. We saw the numbers from EAN of the kinds of, transformation we need, the numbers of electric vehicles we need on the road and other transit solutions, and the numbers of heat pumps and other technologies. So just know we're viewing these ideas as a kind of down payment and something to build on that we need to keep ratcheting up year after year to get where we need to go. So the specific ideas included doubling funding for low-income weatherization, creating an electric vehicle incentive program. We've had two different Volkswagen settlements, one of which was a $3.5 million consumer settlement. And that one, the initial proposal was just let's put that into the general fund. And we're saying let's take that money and create an EV incentive program, particularly focused on getting people with lower incomes into electric vehicles. Because we know if we're going to do this transition and do it right and do it in an equitable way, we need to be helping the most vulnerable make this transition along with the rest of us, and that's a huge priority for all of us. We also wanted to prohibit the expansion of large-scale industrial fossil fuel infrastructure, and I think there are a variety of policy ways we might get there. But just knowing, as Bill McKibben said this morning, if we're laying new pipelines, that's locking us into fossil fuel for generations to come, and we know that that's not the path we need to be on. We need to be expanding the deployment of renewable power. Unfortunately, we saw the statistic this morning that we've actually been declining in the last couple of years. This is not okay. This is not the time for that. And finally, Joey mentioned that there is this joint fiscal office study going on right now looking at economy-wide decarbonization policies like carbon pollution pricing that Moreau spoke about, also looking at some other models like the Western Climate Initiative and others. So it's really looking at what kind of economy-wide policies could help benefit Vermont's economy, create jobs, protect the most vulnerable, and also drive down our climate pollution. And I just wanted to note that a number of these ideas were put forward by the Governor's Climate Action Commission, and so a lot of these ideas are really building on those recommendations, and we really hope that the governor will ultimately come to support those. We have not yet seen the proposals that he will support, but that did include the doubling the low-income weatherization and the EV incentive, supporting renewables, and calling for the decarbonization study. So, again, we know that these are an initial step, and we need big, bold policies to really get on the track that we need to be on. I keep going back and forth between depression and optimism on this issue. I was just down in Florida for a conference on a different issue, and I was talking to one woman who was in from California, and she was talking about how her kids had been home from school for 2 weeks because of all the smoke in the air. So they shut down the schools. She was like telling stories of a friend who went into early labor, and then her husband had to take her kids to a different part of the state because the smoke was so bad, and she was in the NICU alone, and just like the real impacts this is having on people's lives. And another woman I was speaking to from Florida was talking about the red tide. And she was, just this young woman working at a, beachside bar, the bartender. And she was just talking about how, all summer that the one that gripped me the most was she was talking about the manatees and how, there had been hundreds of dolphins that had washed up on shore, but she was like, manatees stay together as a family. So you would see families of parents and baby manatees washing up on shore. So there were 500 some dead manatees. And so these are, this red tide that's exacerbated by climate change, that's, pollution from a whole host of sources. These are the kinds of things we're seeing all over the country right now. And so it's easy to get depressed. But at the same time, and I know all of you in this room who've worked on this stuff for years, I'm optimistic too, because I know that we have solutions at our fingertips that we know are actually going to help our economy, help our world, help drive down climate pollution. And so we know it's really political will at this point to implement it. It's not, that we need to do a whole bunch of research for the next 10 years to figure out how we get out of this mess. I'm also optimistic because I see that there is an energy and enthusiasm in the country and in Vermont that, this horrible federal administration is spurring people to action, and people are getting involved in the political process and in issues and advocacy in a way that, for a lot of people, they hadn't really thought about it much before, and they're busy with their lives and getting food on the table for their kids and all the things that keep us busy. And so I think being able to tap into the energy that's out there is really important. And we've had some years of leadership from, Senator Ballot, Senator Bray, Senator McDonald I see over there, but we need more leaders like them. I would just point out that the House today has a caucus, so I'm sure there are lots of representatives that would have loved to be here today, but they are all doing their caucus together, and so unfortunately it conflicted, so they're not able to be here. So we do have a lot of leaders, but we need even more, and we have been undertaking a variety of strategies. One thing that we've been doing is trying to build a bench of climate leaders, and this year I was really excited because a bunch of clean energy professionals ran for office and won. And so this includes people that you might have met here at VECAN, like Becca White from Hartford, Scott Campbell from St. Johnsbury, Mike McCarthy from St. Albans, Caleb Elder from Bristol, Andrew Perchlick, I see over there, hey Andrew, a new senator from Washington County. Yay! So, these are all people who are, have been working in this space for years and have this great expertise and passion that they are now leaders that will be in the State House helping champion these issues. And there are also a whole host of other people who aren't professionals and maybe haven't been to VECAN before, but we're running on pro-climate action platforms. And so I think there's going to be a lot of exciting energy and expertise at the State House this year from some new leaders really pushing for and I think demanding some serious policy change. We are going to be continuing to work on this program, so constant plug. You all are already leaders in your communities. If you haven't thought about running for office before, your select board, state office, think about it. Think about other people in your community who you think would be good leaders. connect with me. You can grab me afterwards anytime today. Would love to share. We've been doing things like candidate trainings, just hands-on training of how you could, get that first foot in the door of how to get on that path to running for office. And I want to be a resource for you all in that. So another thing that we've been trying to do more